This afternoon, I'd like to look a little bit at that first reading. It comes from the prophet Ezekiel. Over these past few weeks, we've been getting one prophet after another: Hosea, Amos, Jeremiah, Isaiah. And now we're dealing with Ezekiel. And he's one of my favorite prophets because he was so strange. Ezekiel was a priest, and he was taken into exile when Jerusalem was conquered for the first time in 597 BC. Well, I say the first time because it would be reconquered in 587. When they conquered in 597, the first time, they took a whole bunch of people in exile, including Ezekiel. 587, almost anyone who was educated, anyone who was rich, was taken away and the city was devastated. So Ezekiel is writing from Babylon. And he talks about the relationship God had with his people. Now, I said Ezekiel's strange. In one of the passages we hear that he read a scroll and then he ate it. What would you do if you saw me rip off the page from the lectionary and stuff it in my mouth? You know, someone would run to tell the guardian, Father Jude's losing it. He sat on one side in front of his house, naked, for over 100 days, and then turned on the other side. Can you picture the property values in his neighborhood? He did very strange things. And once I was teaching a course on the prophets, and I asked one of my students who was doubling in theology and psychology, how would you diagnose him? Now, you can't do that for somebody who lived 2,500 years ago. But he did come down with probably bipolar personality with delusional episodes. Why would God choose a person like that? Because in the ancient world, people who were a little off were considered touched by God. And so, in fact, his mental illness would make him more credible and not less. But it always hits me that God chose someone who is mentally ill. Who am I to reject God's message through the weak and the poor around me? That sometimes it's the very ones you least expect who are speaking God's message to us. Now, what is he saying today? He's saying that God is faithful and merciful. Those are two words they use for God in the Old Testament. In Hebrew, faithful is the word emet, E-M-E-T. Merciful, hesed. God is faithful, never turns back on his covenant. Even if we break the covenant, God is not going to turn his back on us. When we sin, God does not stop loving us. God loves us before we sin, while we're sinning, and after we've sinned. The problem with sin is not God, it's us. We're turning our back on that love. But God continues to love us. And God is merciful. Gives us another chance, and another, and another, and another. How merciful is God? We can't even begin to fathom it. He loves us to death. So God is saying to Israel, listen, you're in exile, at least a lot of you, and you deserve this punishment, but I still love you. So what I'm going to do, that old covenant, it wasn't enough. It was written on tablets of stone. Remember the 10 Commandments? The new covenant is going to be written on your hearts. And that's the kind of relationship we should have from now on. Not one of fulfilling requirements, but one where we fall in love with each other. In our spiritual life, it's easy to fall into the category of doing what we're supposed to do to be a spiritual person. Because if I fill out all the checks, then I get to go to heaven. And if we're living faith that way, then we're basically saying to God, God, I want to get the good reward. I want to get a good seat in heaven, 2 angels with ostrich feather fans, 2 angels to peel grapes and drop in my mouth. We're thinking about us. To get to heaven, We have to be loving, serving, just like Jesus was. He came to earth to teach us that. And we have to make our relationship with God a real personal relationship. Our prayers are not simply things to say and do. They're words to somebody we love. Now, admittedly, do we love God every day? Sometimes it depends on the weather. Sometimes it depends on whether we got up on the right side of the bed. Our faith is never straight up to heaven. It's usually like, remember the sine curve in algebra? Up and down. But if we try to make God the center, if we try to see God's presence all around us, then sooner or later we will whisper, without even knowing it, I love you, God. Thank you. It is so beautiful. It is so good. That's what that new covenant is all about. And all the other things that we do will just be ways to express that love for God. Now, again, are there dry patches in our spiritual life? There always are. There always are. But when we catch ourselves in one of those dry patches, it's time to talk to somebody about our faith. It's time to seek advice. It's time to go up to somebody out of the blue and say, will you keep me in your prayers? Because I really need it right now. Because we don't want to stay in that arid atmosphere. It's not good for us. And when the good times come, we should walk around with a silly grin on our face and say, so that people who see us will say, has she fallen in love? And we can say yes.